right, grab your popcorn and let's talk season 2 of Paradise, which premiered this past Monday. Hulu did us all a favor and dropped 3 episodes right off the back. Thank you, Hulu. I appreciate you. But yeah, let's get into it. I have a lot to say. It was so much happened that I had to go back and like write everything down because if not, I would have forgot. So I have my notes. If you see me looking down, it's just me looking at my notes, trying to remember every little nugget that was given to us. So at this point, I am a serial overthinker and there was so much given to me that like I've overanalyzed this so much that I have filmed this video, I think 11 times. All right. So let's talk about it. So episode 1 is titled Graceland. Also, before I start, if you haven't watched Paradise, please stop and go watch season 1 of Paradise and start season 2. Also, if you have watched but you haven't watched the episodes yet, just know I'm about to give away spoilers. I typically don't give away spoilers, or I don't do spoilers, but it's very hard because I have a lot of questions, and my questions are kind of centered around things that happened in the episode, and how can I ask those questions without giving stuff away, right? So anyway, let's get into it. Episode 1, Graceland. So Paradise introduced a new character to us. Not only did they introduce a new character, but they gave that character an entire episode, which only lets me know that this character is going to be extremely important throughout this season. So the character, her name is Annie. It's played by Shailene Woodley. One phenomenal casting when it comes to Annie, because Shailene normally, in most of the roles that I've seen her in, she gives this like timid yet really powerful kind of persona of her character, and I think that like transpires well with Annie, because you almost look at Annie and think that she's broken, you know, she's grief stricken, she's got, you know, this going on, but yet she's really smart and stronger than you could probably ever imagine. So great casting. So I don't want to give away too much of the episode, but I do want to go over some main points that we do know about Annie. And like I said, the entire episode is pretty much centered around her, so we got to know Annie well. So we do know that when Annie's young, her mom does die. Her mom loves Elvis. Annie spends a lot of time at Graceland. And after her mom passes, when she gets older, she does end up going to med school, which she ultimately drops out of and becomes a tour guide at none other than Graceland. So that's pretty much like, I would say, a backstory on Annie's character. Now, we do get to see in the episode where I'm going to call it the blackout. So we do get to see Annie's point of view. So this entire episode is primarily based around the point of view of Annie and basically what happens, or her take on what happens during the blackout, right? So, and this is going to be a perspective outside of the dome. So right now in Paradise, all we know is the dome and the dome that was built. So Paradise, right? That's the only perspective that we've seen. So now, starting off in season 2, we now get a point of view of someone who is outside of the dome, and we get to see what actually happens with them on the outside of the dome. I feel like that was just repetitive, but anyway. So we see what happens, when the blackout starts to occur, and then we know that Annie takes some sort of refuge, and then emerges later. So the point in time which Annie, or I would say the sunlight, when the sunlight comes back, it's been about 2 to 3 years since the actual blackout took place, which is weird because I feel like when we were in the dome in season 1, I don't know that it felt that long, but I guess we didn't know how long they were in there. So the sunlight ends up coming back out at some point, and Annie is can I speak? Do I know English? Annie is ecstatic that the sun is out, so she, doesn't come out of hiding. She doesn't want to come from Graceland because if I hadn't said, she is stuck at Graceland. So she basically was in the basement at Graceland this entire time. So she comes out, and Annie's basically been by herself almost this entire time. She did have, someone with her before, but that person ultimately ends up dying. So it's just been Annie for the better part of this 2 to 3 years. So another key moment in episode 1 was the introduction of a character named Link and his crew. So while Annie is at Graceland and,
she hasn't been with, the outside world, I guess, there are these people that end up coming, which ends up being Link and his crew. Annie, of course, at first is like, hell no. And because she thinks that maybe they're going to hurt her. They're not going to hurt her. She finds this out. She gets a little comfortable to the point where her and Link have a little romantic little shindig, and ultimately Link and his crew leave. There are so many, sorry, my head is spinning because I have so much to say. There's so many things. When Link enters the picture, there's so many little nuggets at this point that gets dropped. One of the first ones is when Link and his crew came, they had noticed that Annie was building or had started growing plants, and they were impressed by that. So we all need to keep note of the fact that Annie has plants growing, right? The next thing is, when they get there, the only thing that they want to know is where the cars are. So at first glance, you're not thinking, who cares about the cars, right? But if we go back a little bit in the episode, we do see when the blackout starts to happen, the tsunami starts, that all the battery operated things aren't working. They end up, they're unable to work. So now if you fast forward, the Link and his crew get there and they have a conversation with Annie, basically, telling her that, any type of modernized battery isn't going to work. So a lot of reasons they want to see the antique cars, not because they want the cars, but because they want the parts. They need the parts for their cars because modernized batteries and stuff aren't going to work. But of course, you're at Graceland. Another hint to why they even chose Graceland. But they need those parts, right? So another little nugget that they're giving us, right? Another key point is there's at one point in this episode where Annie and Link are having a conversation out on a balcony. And at that point in time, they're talking about how old Link is. And he, states he's 25. And basically lets Annie know that when the blackout occurred, he was in college, and he gives the college ID, right? It was very important for us to know that Link was 25, and that when all this happened, he was in college. That is a very important piece of information. So not only does he tell her, he gives, like I said, he gave her his student ID and was like, you can keep that. So she does end up keeping it. Let's see, a good thing to note. Oh, I don't know if this is random or not, but so in the beginning when she was doing the tours at Graceland had horses. One horse in particular she was very fond of, but when the blackout started to happen, she let all the horses go to kind of, go be free so that you're not trapped here. But that one horse that she does like and has a, undying love for does end up coming back. So like I said, her and Link ends up having a little bit of a romantic relationship. I want to say when this happens, he asks Annie to leave with him because they have to leave to go off to Colorado. So he does ask Annie to go, and at first Annie is like, "Oh yeah, basically like, how cool." We'll just say that. But when it comes the next day and they have to go, Annie basically locks herself in a room, and we see Link at the door, basically, knocking at the door, "Annie, come on, we gotta go," and she just is like not having it. So another one key piece of information two key pieces of information during this scene. One thing is Link catches a nosebleed. He gets a nosebleed during this scene. We're gonna circle back to the nosebleeds, okay? Another thing is one of the older guy in the crew comes down, and he is like, "Link, we gotta go. We gotta get out of here. It's time for us to go. We really gotta get to Colorado. We need to kill Alex." First of all, who is Alex? I don't recall an Alex in season 1. Who's Alex? Did I miss Alex? I don't. We're gonna circle back to Alex, okay? So 2 things. They're gonna go kill Alex, and Link caught a nosebleed. All right. So they leave, and when Annie finally comes out, she sees that Link did leave her supplies. He left her a backpack with supplies and a note stating that he'll come back for her. So at this point, the episode it's progressing forward. We see forward. Now, another thing to take note of is as we're starting to progress forward and we see that like time is lapsing, Annie's plants. She has these plants. Remember the plants that they were like, "Oh, you have plants?" The plants are growing now. They're grown. It's food on them. I think it was like peppers or something that was on them. But the plants are growing, and that's important to take note of. So take note of the plants. Annie is growing plants, right? And at this point in time, we now see a side view of Annie and know that Annie is pregnant. So she could only be pregnant with one person's baby, and that's Link, right? So now the things that we know is that, one, Annie didn't want to leave with Link and the crew. We don't know why. We don't know why Annie, for some reason, decided to refuse to leave. There were the nosebleeds. Annie is growing plants. Annie is pregnant. And at this point, you can only assume that she is turning out to be a very important person. Still don't know why Annie is important at this point. But yeah, so the end of the episode basically ends with and she hears this boom out in the distance. Oh, before I talk about that, when they were out on the balcony, her and Link, he states to her, and I think before that they said that there were, or was it just that conversation? I don't know. They have a conversation at one point that basically is them talking about there's, the world isn't as bad as you think it is out there. There are some, good places. There's community coming together and people coming together to rebuild. But there are still some bad spots. And when they were on the balcony, Link pointed out one of those bad spots and was like, "That spot over there," because I think she questioned why they were going a certain route to get to Colorado. And he had to point out that there's bad spots, and that's one, so we're gonna go around it. All right. So towards the end we're at the end of the episode, and there's a loud bang. Annie looks outside and she sees that there's fire, and of course, Annie wants to go find out why there's fire. Me, no thank you. I'm fine. I ain't going. But Annie was like, let's go see what it is. So we see her getting her stuff together, getting some supplies, getting the gun that she has. If you watch the episode, you'll know whose gun that is. So she gets that, and then we see her get on the horse and ride into the woods. And then at this point in time, it kind of ends with us knowing that her and Xavier have now, their worlds are about to, intertwine. So that is the end of episode 1, Graceland. So episode 2, and I'm going to recap all this at the end and get out all my points because I just need you guys to go along the bouncing ball with me, right? So that leads us to episode 2, which is called Mayday. So Mayday is pretty much centered around Xavier and his wife, Terry. We do get a little bit of Annie in this one. We get a little bit of other people in this one. But for the most part, this particular episode is centered around Terry and Xavier. So from what we know from last season is that Xavier finds out that his wife is potentially still alive and he is set to go get her. So we start this episode with him on the plane that we know he was leaving in from episode 1, not episode 1, but season 1. And he is headed to Atlanta where he believes his wife is at. So this starts off with him in the plane and he's calling out to see, does anybody hear him? Is anybody there? And that's kind of where we are. Now, it seems that it's raining. Eventually, we see that it's hail. But I want to note that during this scene, when he's on the plane, I believe he goes through a specific air pocket or air space. And it feels like he comes a little disoriented. He's a little in and out of it. And when he enters that specific airspace, he does get a nosebleed. So again, take note to these nosebleeds. I don't know. We'll circle back. So a lot of this episode, because it's basically him having flashbacks for the most of it. So he almost, because he gets injured and because he's in and out of consciousness. So a lot of times this episode is flashbacks. So on the plane, I believe is one of the times we get a flashback to him with his wife, Terry. Now, outside of everything, let me just say that in these let's just talk about the flashbacks, right? So there are a lot of moments throughout this episode where, like I said, he's injured and he's in and out of consciousness. So every time he goes unconscious, we see a flashback. Now, we basically get, I want to say 3 specific flashbacks. One, to me, I'm still trying to clarify of how important it was, because it was the flashback from when he first left his wife, or when she had to go to Atlanta and he was back in Washington with the president. We get that flashback. But for the most part, the flashbacks are consistently from when him and his wife, Terry, first met. And the other one is him walking down a dark hallway, could be underground, and he's following someone. So I just want to note that this episode, with those flashbacks, we only saw one specific flashback from his encounter with his wife, Terry. So those flashbacks were just literally the very, very first time that they met. Again, I don't know how specific this particular period of time for them was important. Now, I can only do my takeaways. So when they first meet, they're in the hospital. They're both having some sort of surgery. We find out that Terry was, I believe, she was in graduate school. She was going for her master's, I believe. They mention at one point, they have this discussion about a plant because Terry is going to school for science. We're just going to say she's a scientist of some sort. But this particular plant is mentioned, and I gotta go back and get the plant name because it was, it's a scientific little name. So I didn't really catch it, but I just knew, like, okay, when I started putting the pieces of the puzzle together, I said, wait a minute. But yeah, so we know that she goes back to school, or she's in school at this point in time when they first meet, and she's going to school to be a scientist, biologist, something, but it has to do with plants. Now, outside of the show, me spiraling and looking, I see that it is specific. Her field of study is specifically in the area of like plants and food supply. Right? So I felt like it was very important for us to know exactly what Terry does and what her field of study was, because it's like food supply. I think there was like, it was plants, food supply with a very distinct, like, I don't know what word I'm looking for, but it basically in the area of like apocalypse. I'm just going to leave that there. So I think it was important for us to know that. And I'm going to give my theories at the end of Terry. So that was pretty, like, those are all of the pretty much the like the flashbacks that we get. Now, mind you, when he's conscious, there are other things going on. There's a group of kids that he meets. I don't know how important these kids are, but they're noted in my brain to circle back because they had a lot of airtime, and I feel like even though we only saw them for a period of time while he is conscious, I still think that we're going to end up circling back to these kids. So we'll see. That might be future episodes. I don't know. But I'm not letting the kids, they're still right here at the front of the dome and not in the back. So again, I don't want to give away the episode, and I'm trying to like kind of go around this the best I can without giving too much away. So we know the flashbacks are primarily about when he very first met Terry, and then there was the other flashback that I said he had where he's walking down this hallway. Now we see both, like they both kind of are back and forth throughout the episode. Now, with the guy in the hallway, that's all we ever really see until the very end of the episode. So, at the end of the episode, we finally get like the guy kind of turning around, and we get a glimpse of the man's face. Do you want to know who that man was? Link. The same Link from episode 1. Now, I have my theory on this flashback because at this point, I don't know. I can't determine whether that was a flashback or a flash forward. Now, the episode, we know we were doing flashbacks, but how would Xavier know Link? Right? Like, how would Xavier know Link? We'll come back to it in my recap. All right. So that's pretty much that episode. Like I said, I only got a little bit out of this episode. I think it was a little bit slower. But again, I think we were supposed to know and find out what Terry does. I think I think the two major things that we were supposed to get out of this episode were what Terry does and understand that Link is somehow connected to Xavier. Now there is Annie's character in here. We do see interaction with Annie and Xavier, but I won't get too much into that. Watch the episode. But it's very important that Annie this is where we start to see No, you gonna do what I say, Annie. But yeah, go watch it. So anyway, let's move on to episode 3 so that we can try to recap this and I can get out all of my, I wouldn't say theories, but yeah, let's move on to episode 3. All right, let's go episode 3, which is Another Day in Paradise. So if you've watched season 1, then you know episode 3 kind of picks up almost in essence where the season kind of left off in season 1. I mean, granted, you know, a little bit of time has passed, but we don't really realize. I want to say it's about a month, and I'll get to why I think it's about a month in a minute. So there were several different things I think that kind of happened within this episode that I feel were worth noting. And I'm going to try to break this down as best I can in my as I see it in my head. So, let's start with Jeremy. Jeremy is President Bradford's son. So Jeremy in this episode, well, if you knew from the end of season 1, then you know Jeremy had been questioning his father's death, and he had also, you know, he thought that things were being hidden from them. So he wanted to know why and what the government was hiding from them. Mind you, we're in the dome. So Jeremy and Paisley, not Paisley, Presley. Jeremy and Presley are close. Presley is Xavier and Terry's daughter. So they're close. However, they can't really communicate or can't really see each other. So they have figured out alternative ways of communicating with each other. And we see that in the episode. Now, Jeremy does send a letter to Presley and basically is telling her, you know, a lot of his friends are disappearing and he doesn't know where they're taking, you know, the younger people. But they're just all like, they're just vanishing. So I guess they go to try to set up a meeting place to meet with each other. And Presley ends up giving her brother James a note to get to Jeremy, thinking that her brother is going to do right by her, which he does not. Let's say true spoiler, James gets upset that or is scared that something's gonna happen to his sister, because at this point you have to think his mom, they haven't seen their mom in however long, 2 to 3 years, I guess. And their dad has now taken off to try to go find their mom. So right now they honestly and truly just have each other. Now Agent Robinson is taking care of them and, you know, looking after them. And we know who Agent Robinson is from season 1. So James ends up getting Jeremy caught and basically arrested. At which point, and you don't see until later in the episode that he basically finds out where all his friends are because he now goes there. I suspect that this place is further down than the dome. I suspect that it's because it looked like they were getting off of an elevator. But again, we just kind of see a glimpse of this area. So I'm hoping in episode 4 we get to see a little bit more of what that is, because that may have some answers to other things. But if anybody knows anything about this and wants to share thoughts, by all means, please do. So that's Jeremy. That's kind of Jeremy and Presley's perspective of things and what's going on with the kids. Mind you, again, all the kids are kind of rallying together and they are like, something's not right and y'all gonna tell us. So there's that. Now, Agent Robinson. Let's just say Agent Robinson, one, has gotten significantly demoted. But I do want to state, just for thoughts, that before Xavier left, And we find out this episode that he basically tells Jane, which we'll talk about in a minute, to let the people know that he did it because he's getting ready to leave. He's like, I don't care what y'all do. I'm leaving. I'm out. So he basically is like, tell them I did it, so that leaves you to clear. But see, the thing is Agent Robinson basically questions Jane. Like, how did you know to be where you were when Xavier and Sinatra were having their little talk? Because we know from season 1 that Jane shot Sinatra. So, but Agent Robinson is like, something ain't right, girl. How you knew to be there? So she's weary, and I think Jane knows that. So Jane, basically, you see this episode, it feels like she understands that, like, Robinson may be out to get her. She may know something, or she's digging a little too deep. So she does what she needs to do with Jane, and just ain't. Anyway, Agent Robinson is demoted to being Jane's security detail. So, yeah. So that's just a little bit on Agent Robinson. I'm still digging into some, like, what's going on with that, but Jane is doing Jane things, and if you know from season 1, we can't trust that girl. I don't know what she's up to, but we can't trust her. So, moving on to Jane. Jane goes to visit Sinatra in the hospital because Sinatra has woken up. She was in a coma for a little while. She didn't die, but she was in a coma. She goes to visit Sinatra and is basically asking Sinatra, do you remember anything? And ultimately ends up telling her, like, if anything does come to your memory, just know I did it to protect you. So that's what we know about Jane. Jane now is also security detail for the acting president, President Baines. Now, I'm going to give away a huge spoiler right now. So if you don't want to know, I will stop it, fast forward a little bit. So Jane ends up killing President Baines and pins it on our good old friend Agent Robinson. Now, I think she did that because she needed Agent Robinson to shut up. I don't know why she killed President Baines. I really and truly don't. Like, I'm baffled at this point to why this is all going on. I'm really trying to figure out Jane's character, her motives, and like who you work for, girl? Who's your boss? Because right now it feels like you're just moving to the beat of your own drum. I don't know. So that's what Jane has going on. Now, Sinatra, like I said, Sinatra has woken up. I don't know that I believe Sinatra doesn't remember anything. I think she's being silent for a reason. I think she knows to just keep her mouth shut at this point, and not say what her next move is. So we'll figure that out. Now, my biggest takeaway from this episode, I mean, besides there was like those little kind of like nuggets like all over the place that you're kind of like, all right, I need to pay attention to what Jane is doing. Why did she, I kind of know why she framed Agent Robinson, but then there's the kids and, them being down in like this little like detention center. I need more information on that. But Sinatra. Now, in this episode, we do get flashbacks of Sinatra's backstory, and how the dome came about. So in Sinatra's like flashbacks, we do see how she met the professor, how she knows Professor Miller, how the dome comes to life. But my biggest takeaway is when she first met Billy, right? And we know Billy was a little troubled. We know Billy was perceived to be like this bad guy. I don't think Billy was all that bad, but Billy is dead now, so who cares? But I think yeah. Anyway, so we see a flashback of her and Billy, and she basically hires Billy to take out Professor Miller. So this is the biggest, like, kind of mind-blowing moment for me in this episode. And that is the fact that Billy ends up going, like, we see Billy go to the professor's house, Professor Miller, right? When Billy gets there, we see him sitting outside. We see Professor Miller is at the front door of his house, and it almost looks like he looks in Billy's direction, and then he goes back in the house. Now, when Billy gets to the door is still open. So at this point, I could only assume that Professor Miller knew he was coming and knew why he was coming, and he just was like, it's going to happen. It's not even, I don't even need to try to escape this. It's happening. So when Billy goes in the house, he gets into the room, he sees Professor Miller, but his Professor Miller's wife is also in there, who is very ill. Now, there is a lot of exchange of words, and Professor Miller is talking a lot, and, you know, Billy is just being Billy over there. But there are some things that I took notice of in this particular scene. One, Professor Miller says to Billy, you know, when he knows that, you know, he's going to kill me, he says to him, here's a tissue, hands him a tissue. Now, in retrospect, I, as in Billy, was looking at Professor Miller like, why do I need this tissue? So, I mean, Billy takes the tissue or whatever and holds it in his hand. And why does he need that tissue? We'll come back to it. Then he says to Billy that nothing is a coincidence. Okay. So just remember, nothing is a coincidence. Then he asks Billy, he says, hey, a young man is going to come. You know, a boy is going to come. All I ask is that you spare him. Just leave him alone. He has nothing to do with any of this. And Billy's like, okay. Professor Miller starts yapping. Billy said, you're out of here. Right? So we then see Billy going to leave. And as he's leaving, he's met with the boy. We don't see the boy yet, but we obviously know someone's there because he starts talking to him. Now, when this interaction is happening, what happens to Billy? Nosebleed. So in that moment, you kind of go, how? And he acknowledges that he has the tissue. He uses the tissue. But how did Professor Miller know his nose was going to bleed? Anyway. So just take note of that. So Billy and the boy are having interaction. Now, the camera eventually pans to the boy. Who do y'all think that boy was? It was Link. It was Link. It was Link. So, Link. Okay. Before I get into my whole synopsis, those are all pretty much the things that I had taken away from episodes 1 through 3. So let's wrap this up, right? Link is now at the center of everything, right? Link, for what we may or may not know, has been living outside of the dome this entire time, possibly, right? I don't know at this point. I don't know. So Link is now linked to Annie. Link is linked to Xavier. And then Link is linked to Professor Miller, which ultimately would indirectly somehow link him to Sinatra and possibly the other professor. So now if we go back to episode 1, we know that when the blackout happened, Link was a college student. Now let's circle. And he is also connected to Professor Miller. We also know that Link and his crew need to kill Alex. Who's Alex? Who is Alex? So, and when it comes to Xavier, he either knew him in the past or they meet in present, or they meet somewhere in the future. Again, I don't know with Xavier whether that was a flashback or a flash forward. I'm still indecisive on that. I mean, when we see him in the flashback, he does look a lot cleaner. So he does kind of look like the picture that we saw on the student ID, but also before he leaves Graceland, he does, cut his hair, shaves his beard down. He doesn't shave it completely off. Like, it's not completely off. It's not baby face. And when we see him in Xavier's, I think it's more baby face. But again, I still don't know if that's a flashback or a flash forward. I'm still indecisive on that. If anybody has like their speculation on whether that was a flashback or a flash forward, let me know. Now, they could very well have met in a previous time, but why and how and where were they? My brain, I'm overthinking. Anyway, so when it comes to, there's significance behind these nosebleeds. I don't know what it is, and I initially thought maybe possibly radiation, especially with speaking to other people about the episodes, it possibly radiation, but that would only explain Link and Xavier. It wouldn't explain Billy. So why did Billy get the nosebleed? Is there something like, and then Professor Miller knew that he was going to get the nosebleed. So is there something in the house that would have caused that? Like, is it a chip? Are they chipped? I don't know. I'm like, again, I had like pretty solid, like I was pretty solid on the radiation until I really thought about Billy, and it was like, it doesn't make sense with Billy. But then we don't also know what was in Professor Miller's house. And if we think about Link, when in episode 1, Link seems really drained. Like, he doesn't seem like he has the same amount of like his health isn't in the same spot as maybe the rest of the crew. And we just get like little glimpses of it, of him, like, I know at one point there was something wrong with his hand and he fixed it, but he's still, I want to say he caught a nosebleed earlier in the episode too. But he just seems, something's not all the way there. So was Link exposed to something early on, as was Xavier? And then there was something in the house which would explain Billy. All right, so Terry. When all of this first started, so when Paradise first started, I never in my wildest dreams suspected Terry of anything. But now after seeing episode 2, I feel like Terry knows something. I feel like Terry is in the know of something. I don't know if she knows about the dome directly or indirectly, or if she knew something was going to happen and her mission was try to save the planet. But I just know that it was very important for us to know what Terry does. And I just feel that she knows something. Now, I had a theory that like Terry has known about the dome, and I had this theory that maybe potentially Terry was the one who got Xavier in with the president, or making sure that he was on that kind of track, because we know that Xavier couldn't do certain things because of his knee. So presidential detail, it's not gonna cause that much stress on the body unless you really have to do something. But yeah, I have this theory that maybe she is somehow connected to someone who would have gotten him in that detail to make sure that him and the kids were safe when all of this happened. I'm still working on that theory, but I at this point I know. I am 99.9% sure that Terry she knows something or has something to do with something. And I don't know if her mission was to stay outside and rebuild. I don't know. I'm not but at this point, I'm convinced. I am convinced that Terry knows something. Now, and Link knows a lot. Link is literally the link I feel like to everything at this point, because the way he is everywhere, and then also has a kid coming, which is, and we do know that him and his crew want to basically rebuild the world, and kill Alex, whoever Alex is. Yeah. So, and Sinatra is being quiet for a reason. I believe Sinatra remembers she remembers what happens. And I believe that she's being, closed mouth for a reason. I also need to find out who is Jane working for? We need answers to that. Who does Jane work for? Who is her boss? Who is dictating all this? Because there's someone higher up. And at first, you really think that Sinatra is the one pulling all the strings, but it's somebody else. Somebody else is pulling the strings, and Jane works for them. Now remember, Paradise started. It was supposed to be the best of the best. There wasn't supposed to be any crime, anything, and then somehow President Bradford ended up dead. So what we know now is Annie is important somehow, some way. Annie and Link are the key to something. And Terry knows something. Terry is going to be a vital piece of season 2 as well. And those nosebleeds mean something. Now, and if you've watched episode 3, then you would know the backstory of Sinatra, and they talk a lot about the dome, what happens. They talked about the smoke, the fog that would stay for a while, and then when it lifts, they talk about all that stuff. So I don't know if the nosebleeds have anything to do with that, but again, it still doesn't explain Billy. And it doesn't explain how Professor Miller knew that was going to happen. But the one thing that Professor Miller did state is that nothing is a coincidence. And I wholeheartedly believe in this, that nothing, oh my God. What if, no, but how would they have known about Annie? I was just thinking, what if Link already knew about Annie? But then how would they have known about Annie? Because if nothing is a coincidence, wouldn't that make Annie not a coincidence? But then what if it was she just happened to be at Graceland, right? This is me overthinking in real time. This is literally me overthinking in real time. Because now, if nothing is a coincidence, then the relationship between Annie and Link isn't a coincidence. Oh my God, Annie was in med school. No, but they would have known each other. They wouldn't have faked that, right? Because I was going to say, what if Annie and Link were in school together, but no, they don't know each other. And we see that on the balcony. What if Annie knew one of the professors? And in Professor Miller's notes, there's something about Annie. I had to go back and watch all 3 episodes. Because, like I said, Annie is important. It was important for Annie to know. Annie also knew what to do when the blackout occurred. She also had a sense of calm to her. Ooh, the writers of this show. Let me looky here. I am going to be thinking about these episodes until episode 4 comes out, and I can then spiral about episode 4. Oh my Lord, my brain is going 1,000 miles. I'm going to stop here because my brain is about to spiral. Just the sheer thought of me thinking that nothing is a coincidence, like I am about to literally spiral out. All right, I'm going to leave it here. These are all of my thoughts. This is literally just me. I can't even really say what kind of video this is because this is just me going down a rabbit hole and taking y'all down a rabbit hole with me. If you want to go down the rabbit hole again, I will be back next week for episode 4 and we can spiral together. I am also going to put my analysis up on Substack if you want to go read it over there. I am Zakia at the Rue Society. I will put it on the screen somewhere over here, but you can go follow me on Substack and read my analysis that may not be as choppy as me talking right now, but I will be back next week and we can spiral together. Also, you can come back for any book to screen adaptations. Your girl loves a good adaptation. I love anything that's going to spark my brain and make me think. And yeah. So anyway, have a good day. I will see you guys in the next video.